Would you introduce yourself for the record, please?
Good afternoon. Yate, Madam Chair, Chairman Pratt, members of both houses of the Arizona State Legislature, committee staff, my colleagues from ADQ, and the guests in the audience, Che, Stephen, Brian, at City Inishia. I am Tohe Glini, which is water flows together. That's that's who I am as a Diné person, my clan. And my father are Ashiha. And my maternal grandfather is Twotsoni, or Big Water people. And my my paternal grandfathers are Twodich Eatney, which is the Bitterwater clan. And that is how I recognize myself and introduce myself amongst our Diné people, and I appreciate the opportunity to come before you today as the Executive Director for the Navajo Nation's Environmental Protection Agency. First off, on behalf of Navajo Nation President Ben Shelley, we'd like to express our appreciation for the opportunity to participate in today's joint hearing discussing the economic impact of EPA's decision for the state of Arizona's state implementation plan on the regional haze rule. I'm a political appointee and senior leader over the department and the programs that develop environmental protection programs and regulations on the Navajo Nation. These programs implement federal environmental statutes and regulations. I'm also charged, as my counterpart in ADQ, with developing the Navajo Nation's own environmental statutes and the implementing regulations to those Navajo statutes that comport with the federal regulatory scheme. Since the beginning of my service as Executive Director in 2003, I've enjoyed working with the leadership at the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. I'd like to just take a little time to express my gratitude for the thoughtful and well-crafted ADQ Indian policy that frames our relationship and recognizes Navajo Nation sovereignty. The Navajo Nation, is located in the Four Corners region, as many of you know. My homeland occupies the entire northeastern corner of Arizona. We share counties, Coconino, Navajo, and Apache counties. The Navajo Nation is the largest Indian reservation, as many of you may have heard during the Indian Day discussions that you had here recently. Our total acreage is about 27,000 square miles, and we often compare ourselves in size to the state of West Virginia. But another way to look at it is we are 3 times larger than the state of Maricopa County. So we have a lot of responsibility in covering this vast expanse of acreage, square miles. And since our lands cross over several state boundaries, we work with not only the state of Arizona, but the states of New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. And these responsibilities that we have to work cooperatively with our neighboring states have grown as our programs have evolved and as we've developed our own capacity and as we have assumed delegations of authority and primacy approvals from the U.S. EPA. We've attained primacy through various environmental statutes such as the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, to name a few. We began developing our environmental programs in the Navajo Nation in 1973, the formation of an Environmental Protection Commission. This is just 3 years after the U.S. EPA was created by President Nixon. But it wasn't until the late 1980s that we began to receive federal assistance from the EPA through grant programs. And then by the time we reached 1995, our Navajo Nation Council enacted our own version of the National Environmental Policy Act, which is primarily to establish the Navajo Nation EPA as an independent environmental regulatory agency. So since 1995, we've been on a journey that we're sharing with many of the states, seeking delegations of authority or primacy from the federal government, asserting our abilities to run environmental programs the way we see fit, in a manner that meets our needs, and that demonstrates that the Navajo Nation can do its part, protect the environment for the Southwest. And working with our neighboring states and with industry and many of the other partners and stakeholders that have concerns about environmental protection and public health. So in that regard, again, I extended my own appreciation for the past support that we've had from the state of Arizona, as my agency has sought and then obtained multiple primacy approvals from the US EPA. And sort of looking back and trying to give you folks here an understanding of what we do, the Navajo Nation has a long history of various types of development. We're most known for our energy development. It started in the late 19th century and really took off in the early 20th century. Initially, fossil fuel-based resources were discovered on our homeland, mainly oil and coal. We also have some natural gas reserves. And some of you may know, we are in an area that has a lot of uranium resources. And these resources were mined in the 20th century to help the US government develop its nuclear arsenal and to help establish the nuclear energy industry. So the charge that we have at Navajo EPA is, looking back on our history, is cleaning up the legacy of these early energy development activities and to do what we can to restore lands that were contaminated. And as all of you know, many of these activities occurred before the US developed its own EPA and before we all paid a lot of attention to what was happening in the wake of development. One of the things I'd like to highlight for you is that in 2005, the Navajo Nation Environmental Protection Agency obtained primacy for the Title V Operating Permit Program. And by this delegation of authority from US EPA, we now regulate 14 major stationary sources that emit pollutants into the air. And two of them are coal-fired power plants that are on the Navajo Nation. We do not have primacy for the regional haze rule. So one of the things that brings is that we rely on the federal government to implement the regional haze rule for us, which is very different from the current situation here with the state of Arizona. So we're embarked on this mission, dealing primarily with a lot of past problems, but at the same time we have to look forward and be prepared for what's coming down the road. And we spent a lot of time over the past 6 years dealing with regulations being proposed by EPA and then being promulgated. Regulations such as those under the Clean Air Act, namely this Regional Haze Rule and most recently the Utility Act. And we're very concerned about what's on the horizon in terms of these future regulations, because not only do we have the job of dealing with legacy issues and trying to restore contaminated lands, and protect the lands that aren't contaminated, and then also to protect our public health, we also have to balance all of that with the establishment and maintenance of a viable, dynamic Navajo economy, which has been a struggle for many decades. But we continue to try and attain this balance. In doing so, when we looked at these proposals from the US EPA that have directly impacted the Navajo Nation in terms of the 2 power plants that are on the reservation, we've seen the need to reach out beyond the reservation and address some of the issues at facilities off of the reservation. We've commented on the BART proceedings for the San Juan Generating Station in the northeastern part of New Mexico, which is a facility that's regulated by the state of New Mexico. And we also commented last fall on the rule that or the BART determination that's at issue today here in the state of Arizona, affecting the facilities of Apache, Coronado, and Cholla facilities. Much of our concern has to do with the combination of the technical issues, but also really highlighting the non-air quality issues in terms of economic impact. Many of you may know the history of the creation of the coal-fired power plants on the Navajo Reservation. They were established as an environmental compromise so that we wouldn't have 2 more dams on the Colorado River, and they supply the energy for the delivery of much needed water down here in South and Central Arizona from the Colorado River by virtue of the Central Arizona Project. But it also is fueled by Navajo coal. And back at the time of this compromise, it was framed that this would be a boon to the Navajo Nation in terms of helping to establish an economic base. And it has done that. It has done that. So one of the things that we're very concerned about in EPA making these decisions is how this all comes down to what was earlier stated, the faces. You know, who is behind, who are these people that have these jobs? And it's been stated in articles recently in the papers, there's hundreds of Navajos that work on the reservation at the coal mine that powers the 2 coal-fired power plants on the reservation. But there's also a core of workers that we haven't really been able to characterize, but they're union, they're non-union, they travel. They used to do the circuit from Reed Gardner in Nevada, and all the outages and maintenance work that was done. They moved from there to Mojave, and when they were done at Mojave, they came over back into Arizona and went down the line, worked at all these power plants, providing the necessary maintenance. We still have a lot of Navajos that are employed in that maintenance aspect. As well as I said earlier, hundreds of Navajos that work on the reservation, closer to home, don't have to travel as much. So we do have interests for what's happening off of the reservation and around us. More directly, you know, we understand that what EPA is going to decide off the reservation is largely probably what is going to happen on the reservation too, and we've been very concerned about how these decisions are being made. We see the differences between the East Coast and the West Coast, and we also see what's happening in the West with other facilities that are all subject to the regional haze rule, and how they're all dealing with SCR installation issues. So these comments that we filed, were very appreciative of EPA and what they've offered recently, a new policy for consultation with Indian tribes. And we've availed ourselves of these opportunities. We've sat down directly face-to-face with our counterparts in Region 9 out of San Francisco, Region 6 out of Dallas, Texas, and we've been back to Washington, D.C. to talk to folks in the Office of Air and Regulation. And we've even had the ear of the administrator, Lisa Jackson, and we've also had conversations regarding our issues and concerns with the deputy administrator, Bob Perciasepe. But we still find it difficult to feel satisfied that we're reaching EPA. It's one thing I can illustrate is that since I've been in my office for almost 10 years now, we worked very closely with EPA on what would be the Navajo Nation's mercury allocations under the Clean Air Mercury Rule. We had a lot of extensive conversations about those issues. We worked very closely. That rule was promulgated, but it was vacated in 2007 by a Supreme Court decision. EPA had to go back and do it over. Just so happened when they started to do it over, there was a new administration on board. And this new administration did not consult with us, did not tell us what they were planning to do with CAMR 2, which ended up being the Utility MACT rule, or the Mercury rule. And we came to find out eventually that they had done many analyses of all these plants, coal-fired power plants, that would be subject to Utility MACT and other rules, and that there was basically a hit list of facilities that they determined would not be able to comply. And our facilities that are located on the reservation were on that list. And it's just disappointing to have to try and spend so much time working with a federal agency that, on one hand, is very supportive of you on many of the other issues we deal with, but in terms of these air quality issues, seem to have an agenda that they weren't willing to share openly with us. It wasn't until we finally got direct face-to-face meetings and these consultation processes that we were able to learn about these predetermined outcomes. And so we're fighting that. I think we are fighting this idea of one-size-fits-all rulemaking, and we're fighting, as was spoken to earlier today, for the types of considerations and discretion that we feel we're due. And that's the substance of our comments in sort of an overview. So as some problems on the Navajo Nation have remained unaddressed or partially addressed, there's many other conditions on the nation that have changed since I was a child. You know, I was 5 years old when the power plants and the coal mines on the Navajo Nation became operational. This was in the early 1970s. About the same time, the US EPA promulgated the initial set of National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or the NAAQS. We discussed a couple of them earlier this afternoon. Today,